Hey guys, Eric Nevins here. We're going to get the show started in just a moment. But before we do, I want to ask you to do one thing. Go to halfwaytherepodcast.com and sign up for the Halfway There mailing list. You just put in your first name, put in your email, click submit. It's 5 seconds or less. Very easy to do. But then every Monday when a new episode comes out, I will send you an email about the new episode, and that way you'll be sure to know that it's coming out. Also, I have a bunch of interesting things planned for 2018, and I want you to be able to get those. This is the only way you can do that. So go to halfwaytherepodcast.com, put in your email, click submit, and I'll see you over there. Okay, on with the show. This is a good one. Well, welcome to Halfway There. I'm Eric Nevins, and this is the show where we have honest conversations with ordinary Christians about today's Christian experience. I'm excited to share with you this story today. I have one of my friends from way back. His name is Mike Elder, and he's going to share his story with us today. Hi, Mike. How are you doing?
Hi, Eric. I'm doing fine.
Great. I'm glad that you're here. And I'm excited to just get to know you a little bit better. We worked together way back in the day, and we both ended up out here in beautiful Colorado because, let's just be honest, the weather's better here than in Illinois.
Definitely.
Why don't you go ahead and just give us a little bit? I like to start off with a little bit about kind of who you are and what you're doing now, and then we'll go back and see what God's done in your life.
Sure. So I'm here in the greater Denver area, like yourself, and married with 4 kids, 3 of which are still in my home. And I came out from a small town originally about 100 miles west of Chicago, and that's where I sort of had my foundational faith experiences with my family, my parents believers, and an evangelical Christian church in our small town that thankfully was really blessed that in a small town we actually had a pretty large church, one of the largest in the area. And so we had good pastors. We had a lot of my, again, foundational experiences with really good people in the church, some that I'm still friends with now. And that sort of propelled me through an Awana program and Bible memorization, and then into junior and senior high youth group and the experiences I had there, and then ultimately to a Christian college where I got a degree in Christian education, and I'm now working in the telecom field, and really not using that at all. But
we were joking about that.
Yeah, right. Yeah. The main benefit really from my degree, outside of some really neat things I learned about God's Word and about Christian ministry, was really the people I met on campus, and yourself certainly included in that. So.
Yeah. You grew up then, you said, in a Christian family, basically.
Yeah.
Do you remember how faith became personal for you?
Yeah. So I accepted Christ. I guess the standard accept Christ. Pray the prayer and come forward. At a VBS, we called it Backyard Bible Club way back then, when I was, I think, only 4 years old. So that's kind of the start of, at least in my mind, the kind of person I needed to be. And I don't know that I, certainly not at 4, understood the full ramifications of that, but I kind of approached life from that point on as though I'm a Christian and I believe in Jesus. And then certainly you encounter hurdles. I did. I had, as I said, a really good church experience and people, but that didn't necessarily prevent me from doing my own thing that was not always honoring God, but more often honoring myself. And that was largely my own immaturity and to some extent not recognizing um, not so much the difference between right and wrong, but the difference between glorifying God and glorifying self. And I think I spent a lot of time glorifying myself. Um, Getting in trouble. In '89, back in 1989, we had every couple of years we would do a youth conference where we travel with our youth group and meet up with other churches, regional or even on a national level. And in 1989, we were in Bloomington, Indiana, and I brought fireworks along for our after trip. After the conference was over, we were going to go to the sand dunes, and I thought it'd be cool to have fireworks. It was over the 4th of July, and fireworks were explicitly forbidden on the trip. But I thought, in my own mind, I had a little loophole because I wasn't going to use them at the conference, and therefore, what's the big deal? However, the first night, some upperclassmen came in, saw the fireworks, and they were all lit off on the balcony of my dorm room on the campus. And I was on the second floor, right over a major walkway, so it was
They lit off the
easily
fireworks from there?
yes, right there on my windowsill.
Oh no.
And yeah, it was pretty easy to figure out who was the culprit there. So my youth pastor happened to be the head of security
Of course.
that summer, and he felt like he had to make an example. Not that he couldn't understand hijinks, being a youth group kid himself, in the past. But my parents came up and got me and my buddy the next day, and we were on our way home early. So that was sort of the reprimand was hard, and I had punishments at home, and I ended up painting our two-story garage and missing out on another trip. But the neat thing about that was going out with my youth pastor several weeks later for lunch, and him wanting me to know that he still cared about me and that he still had to acknowledge the standard of behavior that I did not acknowledge
Yeah.
or acknowledged and ignored, So that really left an impression on me. And he's been a good friend and a good example in the Lord, really my whole life since junior high. So
Yeah. What did that teach you?
what did it teach me? Well, it taught me that I could be disciplined and not rejected, that I could be instructed even harshly, but with compassion. And, like I said, he was a guy in youth group and actually not too far from where I grew up. And he probably did a lot of the same stuff. So he understood, and yet there's still standards that we have to uphold, certain behavior that's expected of us. And I knew it. It wasn't like I was in the dark or ignorant. I had no excuse. I just wanted to do my own thing. So it really taught me that I could be subjected to punishment and yet still be not ultimately excluded. I mean, I was excluded from the rest of the week, but I was certainly not labeled in the youth group where he didn't want anything to do with me or he wasn't willing to invest his time in me. It was quite the opposite. We had many good times after that.
Yeah. So did that then have an effect on how you saw God, or how you how your faith sort of became more personal?
Well, undoubtedly it did. I mean, I don't know that I
Yeah.
recognized it then,
Yeah, even if
right? Because you're
even if it's not that event, like, how do you remember a time, or do you have a time when your faith started to become more personal? If not, it's all right.
yeah. Well, I'm trying to think. There's probably a few different times. When I was still a kid, kind of a terrible and neat thing happened at the same time. That's kind of how God uses those terrible
Mhm.
things, right? They either remain terrible or they become neat, as you look back and see how God used them to improve your character or to really, bless you. And in 1983, going back even 6 more years, I feel like we're taking a time machine here to
Yeah.
the ancient days. But in 1983, our house caught on fire in the middle of the night, and my dad happened to hear the fire alarm clanging away all the way down in the basement. Just the vibration woke him up, and we all evacuated. We were all okay, but the house was probably 5 to 10 minutes from being completely consumed, and it was not a big trauma to me. Obviously, losing things and seeing your home almost gone is probably more traumatic for my parents than me. But they really walked through that in faith, um, trusting the God was going to take care of them. And I remember that to this day, how they were not shaken. They were sad and then maybe even scared. But once we were out of the home, the main danger was gone, and they were they were steadfast, and really trusting God. And so that really left an impression upon me, even though I was only in fourth grade, that God was trustworthy, and that's been in my life. That's probably been one of the main things that I've embraced um, in my personal walk with the Lord is that He can be trusted.
Mm.
And I think specifically of instances where um, from our days at Hewitt together, and then how that transitioned to the buyout and jobs changed, and I needed new new opportunities to work, and the Lord opened doors. Sometimes in the last, the 11th hour, when I was literally on my knees, just praying for something, and the call came. And His trustworthy, His faithfulness, and His fact that He can be trusted was something that I really think goes back to remembering how my parents handled almost losing their house.
Wow. Yeah, that's really valuable to have an example like that from your family that you can point to and go, this is what we do, right? We trust God, and there was a time when it was really hard, but we trusted Him anyway, and He turned out to be faithful.
Yeah, that definitely. Um, well, this reminds me, as we're remodeling our basement right now, one of the things we have in mind is on our one of our freshly painted and textured walls. We want to put up some kind of not like a memorial, but something that is specific instances in time where the Lord has really come through for us. And
Mm.
thinking about the altar that Noah built after they got off the ark,
Mhm.
and you know, just that no one else saw this coming, but Noah believed, and as a result, God literally saved him and his family, and as well as all the animals. But Noah believed, and he acted in faith, and God rewarded him with literal life-saving protection. And
Yeah.
so I'd like to have a couple little altars like that on my wall, maybe not out of stone, but something that we can look at and point, oh yeah, I remember, you know,
Yeah.
I needed work and God came through.
Yeah, what a cool idea. I know that like because you see it all over scripture. That Noah's one, I think when the Israelites after they cross over the Jordan
Yeah.
to go in and they put up that they grab the stones and they build an altar there. I love that idea. We actually have kind of done something similar. We just remodeled a big chunks of our house this summer, and one thing we want to do is in the hallway. We're gonna do like a dry erase board, and that's gonna be on one wall, and it's gonna be our prayer wall. So it'll be our list where we could write down things that we're praying for, and
Yeah.
just kind of keep track of stuff, kind of for the same reasons, just to keep it in front of us and remind ourselves that hey, we're trusting God for these things. So I love that.
Yeah.
Well, tell me about how would you say what are some of the major experiences that you've had where you've learned? I know we talked about some of them, but where you've learned something about God.
A lot of it was osmosis, right? It was not. It was. I would not qualify it as disciplined pursuit of the Lord. It was,
Mm,
um, Sunday school, and like I mentioned earlier, Awana, and then youth group trips, and youth group messages, and the sermon on Sunday, sometimes again on Sunday night. So I heard there was plenty of exposure, and I'm sure I internalized. You hear the stories, you know all the Bible stories, but I was not home reading the Bible for myself with any kind of regularity. And I'm sure I was challenged to do that, and maybe even um, would exert some effort for a time, but not stay with it. So reading the Bible cover to cover, all that was definitely not my experience. There was familiarity, but it was largely due to the efforts of others rather than my own, personal investment.
what led you to Trinity?
The youth leader I mentioned earlier had gone to Trinity, and he made such an impression upon me that I thought I wanted to go into youth ministry as well. And
Mm,
what better place to go? Trinity was only 100 miles away approximately, and I'd been there for some youth group events in the spring, after classes had let out with my youth group. So I was familiar with it a little bit, and ended up that another guy from my youth group was going to be there. So after some community college in my hometown, I thought that's where the Lord was calling me. And looking back, I don't really know that was true, but I proceeded as though it were. And
yeah.
so I went ahead and I got my bachelor's in Christian education and minored in Bible. Met a lot of great people and had some neat experiences with some youth groups in the area. Spent some time at Willow Creek and some other churches. And really, by the time I was done, I sort of was that was all in question for me, like where I was going to go next. Because although I had, like I said, some good experiences, ultimately working with youth, high school students, just seemed like an overwhelming challenge.
Mm,
That although I would say there was probably a couple different kids through the experiences I had, the sort of the internship experience and stuff that I felt like I had an impact on. By and large, it seemed like it was um, I don't want to say a waste of time, but it did not seem very productive.
why don't you just kind of bridge that gap for us between your childhood and teenage years and your adult life?
Yeah, there's obviously significance for that in that time for all of us, and I had some great moments I talked about at Trinity, but then I also had a not so great moment at Trinity that really threatened to completely derail me, both my faith and my, when you have difficult times that almost kind of pull the shroud over your eyes, where you just can't see how you can get past it. Now I was at Trinity. Trinity really had nothing to do with Trinity itself had nothing to do with
Sure.
what I was going through. But I was at Trinity in undergrad when I found out that this on and off again relationship with a girl from home had resulted in her being pregnant, and we were going to be parents. And it's one of those things that just almost literally knocks you off your feet
Yeah.
into a collapse. So it's pretty rough when I first heard that might be the case, and then when it was confirmed a few weeks later, it was a shock because you're at a Christian school. There's expectations that you're living, uh, at least pursuing pure living, and you're trying to honor God with your decisions, even in your relationships. And um, at least in this particular case, I wasn't doing that and rationalizing things and sort of trying, like I said, on and off again, trying to get out, but not really making the decisions to just stay out and move on. And
then there's this eternal being that comes into your life that you know is always going to have ties to you.
Yeah. So you said that sort of threatened your faith. How did that happen? And take us through how that, how God spoke to you or used that experience.
Yeah, so it didn't threaten my faith in the sense that I was going to stop believing in God or I was even
Sure.
angry at God particularly, but um, I didn't see how there would what's a redemptive path that can get me out past. It's not out of it. I'm not gonna. There is no out of it, right? So um, I guess people in that situation, we certainly talk about abortion or maybe consider it. It wasn't something we considered. It just wasn't the mentality we grew up with, and I'm grateful for that. It just wasn't something that was on the table for us. But um, just we didn't really want to try to escape. As much as it would have been nice to escape all the consequences, I knew that wasn't going to happen. And so, how do we own up to this with our friends and our family? And how do I pursue youth ministry when I'm, unmarried and I'm about to have a child? And people at school at Trinity have one impression of me, and then everyone at home is going to realize the real me is not so great. And so those were some of the difficulties, and I sort of had to face those one at a time. As we went to our families and we announced it, and we took sort of the deserved berating that, that we had coming. As you might expect in a small conservative town when you're all part of the same church, and then you come to your parents with that, and it's like, are you kidding me? Like the last 15, 20 years, that's been one thing that has been made a priority to not ignore. That we don't let this happen. We don't do this. We make better decisions than that, and sadly, in my case, we didn't. And so that was tough, and there was some difficulties with our parents. My parents and I had um, not where I was completely, ostracized, but there was some cooling off. It was strain on the relationship, and then what started, I guess, in the months and in the couple of years around that time frame to pull me out of it was um, a decision I made at counsel from an old pastor, the youth pastor I mentioned earlier, from my home church. Was he had he was out on the West Coast at that time, but we talked, and he really encouraged me to give my daughter up for adoption. And up till then, I really hadn't considered that, um, but really felt like his counsel was the voice of the Holy Spirit,
Mm.
um, telling me to let go. Not that I'm going to necessarily, at that point, as far as my reputation, the damage is already done. So it's not like I'm escaping anything at that point, other than certain responsibilities. But when she's 2 years old, I didn't want to get away from that. I enjoyed it, so it was a real tough, kind of back and forth moment for me to say, okay, I'm going to go through with that. Um, and I guess the neat things that have resulted from that, um, obviously, we decided not to get married, and so the man she married, he adopted my daughter, and we still have a relationship with her. My parents and my brothers and I have a relationship with her and her family, my ex, and even the grandparents that are still back in my hometown. Um, the Lord has sort of mended all of that, and there's no hostility, there's no bitterness. Um, when we're all in town, which doesn't happen very often anymore, but it did more so when the kids were younger. We were all just one family and doing stuff together, and it was pretty neat. So um, there was a way out, but it took patience, and it was financially very difficult for a few years, as far as insurance and income. When I was hoping to be a college student, not supporting, a
Yeah.
child or paying child support, that those things become necessary. So the Lord really made a way for her to have a family and have a full time dad and have his last name and have brothers and sisters and a pretty normal life as far as all that goes. And made way for me because um, when I got married, I took on a 4-year-old of my own that
Hmm.
I don't know I would have been willing to do that had I not already had a child and gone through that process. So the end result was that two two little girls from imperfect situations both ended up with a full time dad.
Wow.
So
Yeah, that's really cool. It sounds like you experienced y- really the love and the kind of direction of God through that in the end. Would you say that?
yeah, I would say that um, definitely reflecting on um, how we become adopted children
Mm.
of God through Jesus and the redemptive process, the redemptive power of that adoption, and seeing that in my daughter's life and how that sort of got her a life back. Not that she wouldn't have had a life, and not that it couldn't have been okay, but it was really much better in our scenario for her to be part of a legitimate established family rather than being split time between two parents. And not to say that isn't ever the best decision, but in my case, there was a better decision, and really felt like the Holy Spirit put the burden on my heart to do it. And as a result, all kinds of peace came. Peace for her and her family, peace for my family, um, and peace between me and my ex, where there was just in the last 20 years there had just really hasn't been. There's been nothing but goodwill between us, which is amazing.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, that is good. If you had to list or just put in one sentence what you learned about God through that experience, what would you say?
That even in the darkest times, when it's difficulty or even consequences coming into your life, it can actually be His mercy saving you from both something worse and at the same time directing you to something so much better. So we tend to attribute difficulty with punishment, and obviously there are consequences to bad decisions, but it was really it was really His mercy because He didn't leave me there. He continued both in forgiving me and then restoring me to a family of my own, and her to
Mm,
a family of her own.
yeah.
And so mercy and forgiveness really would be the two qualities that I would take away from that.
Yeah, I love that because it's a situation where it can easily feel like the end of the world or the end of a
Absolutely.
lot, right? But
Yeah.
God is sort of an expert in figuring out how to make those things um, joyous in the end.
Yeah. Yeah. Joyous. All things that work together for the good. It's hard to. Sometimes we say that, and it sounds kind of trite, but
Yeah.
in this specific instance, man, I felt that very, very vividly. Very powerfully in my life. That all things, even like you said, even in the dark times,
Yeah.
God is an expert at using those to work out
Well, I
things
love.
for good.
Yeah, I love that. That's one of the things I love most about him. That in times when we feel like and you mentioned your reputation, or we feel like we're kind of ruined, whatever. Um, God makes a way out of it, or He makes something out of it, even if we trust Him.
Yeah. Yeah.
And sometimes even when we don't. Interestingly, but anyway, well, that's thanks, Mike. I appreciate that story.
Yeah, that was a big one. Like you said, bridging my adolescent years into adulthood in my mid 20s. It was a pretty powerful moment, one of the defining moments of my life. Um, so it was a little bit of a disillusionment after my 4-year degree was done because I was kind of lost. I thought I had a plan, and as it turned out, um,
I sort of rejected that plan.
Yeah.
And
Wait, you said you rejected that plan?
yeah, I rejected that plan. That it just seemed like my experience, rejected it for me. You know, like the sort of the writing on the wall. It just didn't seem to fit. Like there was some giftedness, it seemed like, but it really didn't. It really ultimately didn't seem to fit for me in youth ministry. So, so it
That's
was disappointing and kind of surprised, I guess. But it felt fairly certain, like confirmation in my heart that this is not it. You know, like there's ministry and being a believer and sharing Christ with others. You know, there'll be opportunities for that, but doing it as a youth pastor is not going to be your calling.
Yeah, well, Mike, I'm hearing you say this kind of theme of like when you talked about going to Trinity, you said, I thought God was leading me there, but maybe that was just me. And then afterwards, you said, well, then I realized that wasn't gonna work. I'm just really curious. I mean, I guess you expressed a little bit about how that made you feel. It's disappointing. Did you get some kind of affirmation about that this is where you're supposed to go from your church beforehand?
Yeah, so I hear you kind of opening that can of worms about calling, and
Yeah. If you
how you
are okay
discern
going
that.
there.
What's that? Yeah, definitely. Yeah. I'm not sure that I have a definitive answer that that you can kind of plug and play for any situation, but I think in my life, and maybe this is true for a lot of folks in general, but believers specifically, that when we're not, as I said, I wasn't diligently in the Word, and not that is cure all necessarily, but it certainly can guard you against a lot of things, and deception being one of them. I think that our selfishness really, in my life, selfishness really was a factor there, that I was kind of doing my own thing, but attributing spiritual motives to it, or a spiritual mandate for it. And like I said, there's a lot of great experiences at Trinity, but primarily it was the people I met, not the instruction that I received to go forward, as a commission, I guess,
Yeah.
to go forward as a commission as a pastor. And so I look back on that as sort of uncertainty, and uncertainty about, okay, so I'm spending time in this community college. Where am I going to go next? And it just seemed like the thing to do, rather than at the time, I would have defended it like, oh no, the Lord is calling me, and this is where I'm going to go, and I'm going to be a youth minister to work with high school students, or junior higher high school students.
Mm-hmm.
And looking back now, I think I would have been defending that. I feel pretty foolish because I was not nearly as confident as maybe my defense would have been. But I think there's that tendency to just kind of do what you want, and then
I want to ask you, like, what did you want? Like, what was it that you wanted out of that?
Well, that's a good question, Eric. I think I wanted a clarification or confidence that I had this clear vocation, that I could just go forward and be successful.
Mm-hmm.
And I sort of made up my mind what it was going to be. And I wouldn't say that I didn't consult God, but I certainly didn't put it in His hands, so to speak. I know it sounds kind of cliche, but I didn't really offer it up in sacrifice for in prayer and study, and maybe even in going to some people that had known me. That youth pastor was gone at that point from our church. He moved on to another ministry, but whether it was reaching out to him or others to say, I'm confident in this, or at least I'm running this over in my mind. What do you think? Do you think I could be successful? Do you think that the Lord has gifted me in this way?
Yeah.
And what challenges do you see for me to overcome to really thrive in that environment? I think those would have been good questions that I
Wow.
didn't really ask.
Yeah. Would you say you had good mentors in the church, or not?
Yeah,
Then?
I would.
Yeah.
I'd say I did, but I think my tendency was to not really talk so much about my fears and limitations or weaknesses, but to just kind of come forward as though I had a plan that was, bulletproof, so to speak. When in actuality, I probably should have offered it up and said, now poke holes in it and show me where I'm wrong. And I don't think I had the maturity to do that. And it's scary, it's scary to be vulnerable in that way and risk. What if this is wrong? What if this is not what God's calling me to? This is just my own, deludedness and my confidence is just in the flesh and not in Christ. So
Yeah, no. So Mike, I relate to you so much because I had a similar experience after I got into seminary, and I even started at TEDS, and then dropped out for 3 years and 2 kids, and eventually came out here to Denver. That's why I came out here to Denver to finish it at Denver Seminary.
Yeah.
And I was looking for something a little different than what really Trinity offered. Is because there tended to be a more academic school, and I was looking for something more spiritual formation. Thus, kind of what we're doing here. But I just know I always had this sense like I wanted to be a pastor, I wanted to shepherd, but the models that I had of being a pastor were pretty monochromatic. There was only one way to do it, and that so I'm curious for you, now because now you're I don't know if you serve in your church at all or now what, but you certainly have the training in the mind for for being engaged and leading in your church. Have you thought about like, are there other ways that maybe like the traditional ministry model doesn't necessarily suit how God's made you, but maybe there were other ways that God was leading you toward?
Well, yeah, I've thought about that. And after my 4-year degree and my decision to not move forward, decision was probably slightly made for me. But as far as youth ministry, I really felt like working with adults was a better fit for me, just the maturity and the way that I could explain and articulate my faith experience and convey that just seemed to be more on a adult level.
Mm-hmm.
And so I actually stayed at Trinity and pursued counseling psychology as a master's degree program. And true to form, ended up disillusioned with that as well.
Yeah.
And that was largely through being challenged from a model to move away from an integrative approach of counseling and psychology and more to a biblical psychology, or a biblical counseling approach, where you're really looking to comprehensive understanding of issues in Scripture and how God works in our hearts and looking at our own sin condition and sort of diagnosing and prescribing from that, and really looking at that as not, like counseling psychology, whether Christian or not, there's a lot of money to be made, or at least there was in Illinois at that time. I don't know that is, a national experience, but typically you see counselors, that make lots of money and charge, $70-$80 an hour. And I really felt convicted that to work with people and teaching them from God's word isn't really going to be a money making experience. It's going to be, maybe there's some level of financial commitment on their part just so they're serious, but teaching the Bible shouldn't come with a price tag. It should be there as a ministry. And so before I completed that program, I stopped taking out loans
Yeah.
and I moved forward and got married and then had to work. And so I kind of stepped away from that for a while, and certainly have had many singular instances, but not really as a program to be a biblical counselor. Although there are probably opportunities at my church that I could look at to even be accredited in that way, because my church is the headquarters for the International Biblical Counseling Association, and so
cool.
I'm in the right place. And my wife and I have both had a lot of opportunities to minister in that way, but it's certainly not a career. So, to answer your question, I don't know.
That's a fair answer.
I ultimately don't know what the answer is to that. There's certainly non-conventional opportunities out there, and the church that I grew up in was very conservative and to some extent legalistic, and I've had some of those ideas challenged through my time reading Philip Yancey, What's Amazing About Grace, and to a lesser but significant extent, Max Lucado's Grip of Grace, and those were very helpful to me, as I was finishing my Trinity days and moving into adulthood and family life.
Yeah, I asked that question not to, just kind of I was curious how you were processing it, but I also, for me, I found, I just knew that the conventional sort of preacher pastor thing didn't really work, and I always thought I wanted to be a teacher. And now I'm starting to realize, I think maybe that was because teachers get all the accolades. You know what I mean? They get all the attention and the money in the church. And then, and so, now I'm starting to go, oh, well, I don't actually care what you think. I mean, I care if people believe the truth, but I care a lot more if you're willing to have a conversation with me and talk and kind of dig into that. And so maybe there's a different role in the church for me, but I was curious if you found something like that through experience. Maybe it's something, who knows, God'll do his thing.
Really, what I've discovered is my passion and any real giftedness lies in writing for me. And so I don't really have a way in my current church to utilize that with regularity.
Yeah.
More of it is online through, just social threads, whether it's Facebook or articles with commentary, and difficult. Those are difficult venues because people aren't really looking to digest and understand. They're typically more ranting and angry or convinced they're right, and sometimes armed with the truth without any kind of compassion or concern for the fact, beyond the fact that they may be right. Like, what they're saying may be right, but it's like if you're going to ostracize all the opposition, then they're not really going to care what you have to say or how right you might be, in which case your truth is really helping you but not anybody else. And that's kind of the tone that I've tried to change in just the little comments I've made here and there over the last 5 to 10 years. It's just try to change the tone where without that truth and love, the sort of taking that biblical mentality of what I'm saying may be true, but if I'm not doing it with any sense of compassion, then I'm not helping anybody. In fact, I might even be pushing them further away from considering the Lord or biblical truth, or just reason in general. Sometimes you can get some pretty crazy ideas up there. But, so writing's my thing.
Oh yeah, you know what? I remember talking to you about that, and that's good. I've read some of your writing. You're good at it.
Thanks.
We need more Mike Elder writing. So, like, if you look at yourself now and you say, okay, you're 45, you guys, let's say 20 years from now, you're 65.
Yeah.
What would you want to see that God has done in you, or possibly through you?
That's good. Good question. Something I think about from time to time, more often with fear and regret
Yeah.
than joy and excitement, just because I look at the last 20 years and I think, man, I'm still struggling with some of these same things. But, um, well, so I mentioned writing. One thing that I would really regret, maybe in terms of at least my own achievements, and I don't mean achievement like, I hope I don't mean anyway. I try not to dwell on that aspect of, the puffing up of myself. But if there is true giftedness in writing, for me, then I'd like to do something with that, whether it's a book or a series of articles, or, I mentioned I make sporadic efforts here and there, and to try to change the tone of conversation online with, and have had, some success with that. But I'm looking, a little bit more substantial, that I complete something that is hopefully useful and encouraging to people, whether it's nonfiction and just talking about some of the same things we're talking about now. God's, God's grace and fallen people, and how that transforms us, or it's transformative if we're willing, and what that willingness looks like, or whether it's a novel that uses some of the same spiritual principles without being overly preachy, but just, I think maybe it's true for all of us, but I know for myself that stories about forgiveness, like specific personal stories about forgiveness, are probably the ones that touch me the most, when someone you have every right to be angry and offended, and just that they maybe even destroyed some aspect of your life, and yet you reach out to them with the love of God, and say, I forgive you. Those stories are powerful to me, and so something like that, a novel in that regard. But writing would be up there with something I'd like to accomplish. But also looking back on just my kids, I have sort of the full range right now, from little to middle, like elementary to teenager. And 20 years from now, Lord willing, we'll all be out of the home. And
Right.
I would like to, whether they're super successful in the economic sense, in the career sense, whether they are or aren't, I'd like to see them loving God, and that I was instrumental in pushing them out on that, leading them, but also pushing them out on their own onto that journey where they've accepted my discipline and they've benefited from it, and accepted, some of the better habits that I've had, and spiritual discipline, and they've incorporated that into their own, they've internalized it and made it personal for them, like talking about my story as a 4-year-old and my parents, that I pass on that, that mantle of, we're the elder family and we love Jesus, and we don't have it perfect. We don't have it all figured out, but we're not going to walk away from that, whether it's from personal neglect or from the pressure of the world, but we're not going to relinquish that. We're going to pass it on to our families.
Yeah.
So
I love that, Mike.
So that legacy of faith, and having an opportunity to write about all of that, or something else in a way that hopefully helps people. I think that's where I struggle, is I get started on a project and I start to criticize it, and then I wonder if it's really going to be, relatable and beneficial, and then I stop. So
yeah,
I'd like to push forward. I know you've encouraged me in that area, and appreciate that.
Yeah, you're welcome. Mike, anything else you want to leave us with?
Well, I touched on this earlier, and taking the flavor of Christ out into the world, out into the digital world where there's so many people commenting and spewing out, oftentimes hatred. Sometimes it's the Christians that are, there's this emphasis on being right, that, well, I got the right understanding, the right perspective, and therefore that enables, that sort of gives me license to use it as a billy club, to beat down all the opposition. And I guess I've just really been challenged, whether it's politics or just, maybe it's all politics anymore, but just in all these social debates that we have, from guns to abortion to political conservatism versus leftism and liberalism, and all of this, that it's been impressed upon me that it's not about being right; it's about the people. So I do need to be right. I do need to be careful what I say, or what I type out there, put out there in the world if I'm representing Christ. So I need to be right about that. But I also need to be right when it comes to dealing with people. And that means if I'm not there to demonstrate Christ's love, then I really don't have anything to say. Yeah. So, whether it's talking about people as snowflakes or, what's the pajama term I heard, pajama boys or whatever. All this name calling, for you and your buddy, or for me and my buddy, we might understand what we're talking about. But when you put that out in public, it just tells these people that they're marginalized, that you don't have any concern for them. And if that's the case, then what's the point in talking? So there isn't a point, So it really comes back to, it's not just about being right; it's about loving people. And
amen.
Getting that down first, and then, trying to talk about not just being right about an issue, but being right with God.
Yeah,
right.
Totally agree. All right, brother. Well, thanks a lot. I sure appreciate you sharing your story with us.
Yeah, I hope it's helpful and encouraging to people to hear about my victories and my struggles, and that some of those struggles are still there. That, like I said, we can still be hopeful because Christ will meet us where we're at.
Absolutely. Thanks a lot.